Sometimes losing control feels like everything is falling apart. But what if the part of you that is falling apart was never the part that could truly hold your life together? That's the terrifying doorway most people try to avoid. Because when life stops obeying your plan, when the future becomes uncertain, when the thing you were holding on to starts slipping through your fingers, the mind immediately panics. It says, do something. Fix this. Regain control. And sometimes, that voice sounds responsible. But underneath it, there's often fear. Fear of being helpless. Fear of being abandoned. Fear that if you stop gripping everything, nothing will hold you. But this is where the deeper spiritual truth begins. Because losing control does not always mean you are being punished. Sometimes it means the false self is finally being exposed. Sometimes it means the life you built from fear can no longer carry the weight of your soul. Sometimes losing control is not God leaving you. Sometimes it's God removing your illusion that you were ever in control to begin with. And let's be honest, this isn't easy. People love to talk about surrender like it's soft and peaceful. But real surrender often begins as terror. Because when you have survived by controlling everything, letting go does not feel spiritual. It feels dangerous. If you grew up needing to read the room, predict someone's mood, manage disappointment, protect yourself from emotional chaos, or stay one step ahead of pain, then control probably became your nervous system's version of prayer. You may not call it control. You may call it being prepared. You may call it being responsible. You may call it having standards. You may even call it protecting your peace. And sometimes, yes, there's truth to that. But there is also a kind of control that's not from wisdom. It is fear dressed as discipline. It is anxiety pretending to be clarity. It's the ego trying to become God because it does not trust God to be present. This is why losing control can feel so humiliating. Because it reveals how much of your identity was built around being able to manage outcomes. You thought you were strong because you could hold everything together. But sometimes, strength is not holding everything together. Sometimes strength is finally admitting that your grip has become a prison. The mind creates an image of God that fits inside control. A God who rewards perfect planning. A God who protects you if you behave correctly. A God who gives certainty if you pray the right way, think the right thoughts, make the right choices, and never lose your grip. But that's not direct experience of God. That's the mind trying to turn God into a predictable system. And this is where many people get stuck. They don't actually want God. They want certainty. They want guarantees. They want a divine contract that says, if I do everything right, nothing painful will happen. But life doesn't work that way. And deep down, you already know this. Good people still face loss. Loving people still get betrayed. Spiritual people still feel confused. Devoted people still walk through silence. This does not mean God is absent. It means the mind's version of God was too small. The mind wants a God it can use. A God it can bargain with. A God it can control through belief, effort, and performance. But the living God cannot be reduced to a mechanism. The burning bush was not controlled by Moses. It appeared. It called. It interrupted. it revealed. And Moses did not master it. He listened. That's the difference. The mind wants to command reality. The soul learns how to stand barefoot before mystery. The more you try to control your way to God, the farther God seems to feel. Not because God has moved, but because control keeps you locked inside the separate self. Control says, I am here. Life is over there. God is somewhere else, and I must force the distance to close. But surrender begins to reveal something different. God is not somewhere else waiting for you to successfully manage your way into divine approval. God is not hiding behind the perfect outcome. God is not found only when life finally makes sense. God is present before the outcome, before the answer, before the mind knows what to do next. That's why losing control can become sacred. Because when the mind can no longer dominate the moment, something deeper has room to appear. Not always dramatically, not always with visions or signs. Sometimes it appears as a quiet breath, a strange calm in the middle of uncertainty, a soft knowing that says, I don't know what comes next, but I am not separate from what is real. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of trust. Not blind trust. Not pretending everything is fine. But the kind of trust that no longer demands total certainty before it allows God to be present. What the Gnostics called the monad is not another God competing with God. It is a way of pointing toward the undivided source beneath all division, the one before separation, the reality beneath the mind's categories, the wholeness that does not depend on your ability to control appearances. The false self lives through fragmentation. It says, this must happen for me to be safe. This plan must work for my life to have meaning. This outcome must arrive for God to be real. But the monad points beneath all of that. It points to the truth that what is real is not created by your control and cannot be destroyed by your lack of control. The mind thinks losing control means losing yourself. But from a deeper view, losing control may be the first time you stop worshiping the false self. Because the false self survives through management. It needs constant reinforcement. It needs constant certainty. It needs constant explanation. But the deeper self does not need to control reality in order to exist. It is already rooted in what is. That's why surrender is not collapse. Surrender is returning from fragmentation to wholeness. It is the wave remembering the ocean, not by controlling the sea, but by realizing it was never separate from it to begin with. Surrender doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean letting people abuse you. It doesn't mean sitting around doing nothing while your life burns down. That's not surrender. That's avoidance, wearing spiritual clothing. Real surrender is not the absence of action. It's the absence of egoic panic inside action. You still make choices. You still set boundaries. You still build, work, and heal. But you stop pretending that your fear has divine authority. You stop letting anxiety sit on the throne. You stop confusing obsessive control with wisdom. This matters because a lot of people use spirituality to bypass their actual life. They say, "I'm surrendering," when in reality, they're just afraid to act. That's not what this is. True surrender is deeply awake. It asks, "What is mine to do?" And then it does that without trying to control every result. That's the clean line. Control is obsessed with outcomes. Surrender is faithful to alignment. Control asks, "How do I force this to become what I want?" Surrender asks, "What is true? And what does truth require of me?" That difference will change your life. So what does this look like in your real life? It looks like sending the message you know is honest, without trying to control how they receive it. It looks like letting someone be disappointed, without immediately betraying yourself to fix their emotions. It looks like not chasing someone who has already shown you that they cannot meet you with respect. This is where God becomes real. Not as something you perform belief toward, but as the quiet presence that remains when your usual methods fail. And maybe that's why losing control hurts so much. Because it exposes every false altar you have been kneeling before. The altar of approval. The altar of being understood. The altar of never being heard again. But when those altars crack, something deeper can finally be seen. You were not held by control. You were exhausted by it. You were not protected by fear. You were imprisoned by it. And God was not waiting for you to become perfectly in control. God was waiting in the place your control wouldn't let you enter. So if you feel like you're losing control right now, don't rush to label it as failure. Look deeper. Something may be breaking, but not everything that breaks is meant to be restored. Sometimes the breaking is the mercy. Sometimes the plan falls apart because it was built around a version of you that could not receive peace. Sometimes the door closes because you kept trying to force your soul into a room it had already outgrown. And sometimes God feels closest not when your life finally obeys you, but when you stop needing life to obey your fear. This isn't about giving up. It's about giving over. Giving over the illusion that you have to hold the entire universe together with your mind. Giving over the belief that uncertainty means abandonment. Giving over the false image of God as something you must control or understand before you can trust. Because beneath the fear, beneath the panic, beneath the collapsing identity, there's a deeper presence. Still, whole, and unmoved. And the moment you stop gripping so tightly, you may realize something that control never allowed you to see. You were never holding God. God was holding you. If this journey spoke to you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who is learning how to trust what control could never give them. Comment below. I am learning to surrender what fear tried to control. I read every comment. If you would like to support my work directly, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/MagnumOpus333. Or you can explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. Remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.